All right.
All right.
Welcome back, everybody, on the live stream. We are back and we are diving straight into another round of presenters. So here we are joined by 3 presenters in this block that'll take us up to lunchtime. We have Carl Elefante with Quinn Evans Architects and the American Institute of Architects. We have Christy Hugh from the 4th District Agricultural Association, the Fairgrounds CEO. And then we have Jeff Skak. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry for not asking you in advance, Jeff, the City of Petaluma Fire Chief. So as always, you're very familiar with this format. We will take 10 minutes per presenter. Presenters, take a look at Lynn's screen. There will be a countdown clock there. And once your 10 minutes is up, we'll kindly ask you to just finish that sentence. And then after all 3 presenters have gone, we will open it up for a joint Q&A session with panelists. So panelists, please be writing down your questions and ready to raise your hands after the 3 speakers conclude. All right, and we will open it up with Carl Elefante. Carl, let me get your slides shared on screen and pass it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I was here with you virtually also last year, part of the Know Before You Grow effort. I really admire what you're doing here, how inclusive and Are you okay? Can I continue?
Pause. Just a reminder to everyone to please mute yourselves.
Oh,
including Alex.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And Carl, I am going to go find the color version of your slides, but please continue and I might just swap the screen share. Apologies.
Yes, so this slide is black and white, so you might be just fine.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I really admire what you're doing. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Great. So people who have any connection to me know me as a historic preservation architect. I reuse buildings for a living. And, you know, when you look at buildings like these beautifully restored buildings, it's kind of really pretty apparent what the value of continuing to use existing buildings is. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. Great. Thank you. It might surprise you to hear that 3 of these 4 buildings were slated for demolition. The one on the top left, which is the National Academy of Sciences, you can see the Lincoln Memorial in the background there. Of course, these beautiful, historically significant buildings are important to save. The rest of the buildings were all slated for demolition. The one on the top right was literally a ruin, had fire in it. The one on the bottom left was an obsolete power plant. It had no use. It wasn't even really a building. It was a brick shell, you know, arrayed around a power plant. And then on the bottom right, typical modern era building, you know, oh, these are the most unloved buildings anywhere. Next slide, please. So as we talk about this, you know, phase 1, the study area 1, the fairgrounds, well, what is this? What is existing buildings? Why do you need to hear from me, an existing building architect? There really are not a lot of high value existing buildings on this property. Next, please. So I want to say that there is a relevance here, and I'm going to show you the relevance in terms of understanding building sector decarbonization. Next, please. Of course, we talk about decarbonization, and we know that the kind of root is with the Paris Agreement and what are the goals from the Paris Agreement. Next. You're probably less familiar with what the building sector decarbonization goals are, but I can tell you that you know, the buildings contribute hugely to greenhouse gas emissions, and there's really quite a lot of work being done to try to understand the nitty-gritty of that. How does that really work? Next slide, please. Very straightforward way to think about it is that there are basically three sources of greenhouse gas emissions from buildings and in the building sector. The use of fossil fuels in buildings like gas for heating and for cooking, et cetera. The power that buildings consume that's generated by dirty power sources. And then, of course, the industry that actually creates the materials that we make buildings out of. These are the three elements. Next, please. The plan is to basically green all three of those elements, have green power, have green buildings that don't include fossil fuels and that are really high performant buildings, et cetera, integrate renewable energy into them, and then of course have green industry as well. So that's what we need to achieve, and we need to achieve it in the next 20 or 30 years. Next, please. So how do we do that? And the key to the conversation about existing buildings is about really thinking in terms of life cycle. Next, please. Now, you tend to hear about life cycle talked about on the material level. What are the materials we're using? Are they carbon neutral? Are they terrible carbon polluters, et cetera? Next, please. The next level of this is really the one that we need to pay the most attention to. We do the worst job with this, which is that most of the building materials that we use today are actually assemblies. Most of those assemblies have a weak link that makes the rest of the assembly completely useless. They end up being thrown into the landfills. This is our technology that we accept as green technology today. I would say that we have some learning to do. Next. And as a building reuser, we really understand that buildings are complex systems, multi-layered systems, and we really need to think of them holistically. We really need to be thinking about whole building life cycles. Next, please. The term of art in climate change is actually whole life carbon accounting. We need to account for all the carbon that is related to our building sector. Next, please. In the land of the greenhouse gas nerds, this is talked about in terms of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. I'll just explain a little bit about what that means. Next, please. Scope 1 is generally the emissions that take place right on site that are called direct emissions, as I said before, burning fossil fuels in buildings. Next, please. Scope 2 is in a lot of ways the hardest to understand. Here are all these photographs of things that are on site. They're in buildings. It's the computers and the lighting and the heating and the air conditioning. But actually, their emissions are created off-site. Next slide, please. The emissions come from the power that is generated that those things use. So that's what Scope 2 is. And most of the power in this country, by the way, is dirty power. Next, please. And then the last, and I think least understood, is what's called embodied emissions, the Scope 3 emissions. What's the industry that actually supports making buildings and operating and maintaining buildings? Next, please. So we really need to be thinking about a balanced approach to building sector decarbonization. It needs to take all of those things into account and have a plan for each of them. Next, please. We're in a fortunate position where today the building codes are pretty good. What we actually need to do is quite straightforward. We need to electrify our buildings. We need to use renewables, both on-site and off-site. And then we need to address that third part, the Scope 3, the embodied carbon. Next, please. So how do we do that? Most of the time, you will hear people talking about how we're going to build our way out of it. We're going to use new, wonderful, super energy efficient buildings, et cetera, et cetera. That's how we're going to do it. We're going to build our way out of this problem. When we do that, we emit a huge footprint of embodied emissions to create those buildings. And the actual impact that on the indirect and direct emissions, the amount of reduction is actually a little bit smaller than we wish it would be. Next, please. On the other hand, when we retrofit buildings, it's the opposite scenario. We have very direct, large impacts on both indirect and direct emissions from the buildings and the power that we're using to generate to power those buildings, and a relatively small embodied carbon footprint. Next, please.
Excuse me, just one second. Please just remember to slow down for interpretation. Thank you.
Or if I can make an amendment to that, because you're on limited time, I know whenever you pause, you may see I'm pausing the time over here. So feel free to take as many pauses as you'd like.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know that. I know that I'm moving pretty quickly here. We need to balance these two things. We need to balance taking care of the existing buildings we have, and also the growth that we need in replacing buildings that need to be replaced. Well, what does a balanced approach really look like? And using national numbers, and you have to really understand your local scenario, it's about a 3-to-1 ratio. We need to renovate about 3 times more buildings than we build. Next slide, please. What that means is for every new project that you're doing in Petaluma, you need to be thinking about what are you doing not with those buildings, but the other buildings in town. What are you doing to reduce the existing footprint? And in fact, you need to prioritize that. So as you're looking at the fairground, remember that it really does need to be related to a community-wide idea. Next, please. There are 2 really important ways that we can put our thumb on the scale and improve those ratios and really move things along more quickly. The first obvious one is we need to really implement renewable energy in every possible way. Buildings can be net zero energy buildings where they have solar resources or wind resources or geothermal resources on site to really allow them to generate more power than they need. Next slide, please. The next thing that we can do to put our thumb on the scale is to use carbon positive materials. There's we could do a whole presentation on this, but generally today that means using bio-based materials, generally wood-based or other bio-based materials like that. Next slide, please. So even though I'm not here to talk about all the important buildings that are on the fairgrounds that need to be preserved and saved and are an important part of your cultural heritage as well as your carbon footprint, I just would say that do not think that this fairgrounds development is separate from the larger community. You have thousands of existing buildings in town. You need to balance your new development with the retrofit of the existing building stock, and they have to become zero carbon together. And that's my presentation. Thanks again for having me here today.
Thank you, Carl. I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to Christy's slides. Give me one moment. All right. And now we have Christy Hubaker from the current FAIR CEO, who you've heard from a couple times so far. Christy, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. I'm Christy Hubaker. Most of you have already met me as I've presented to you. This is my 3rd time getting to meet you all. I wanted to start with a little introduction about myself because I think it speaks a lot to the importance of these grounds. A fairgrounds acts as a hub of community activity, a place where agriculture, art, culture, and families come together. We have the great privilege of living in a diverse and colorful community, rich in history, leading to an even brighter future. The Sonoma Marin Fairgrounds offers a place for different paths and ideas to come together and weave a portrait representative of who we are. As a child, one of my earliest memories is attending the annual fair where I lost a tooth and a caramel apple and saw my first live band performance. That memory, while I didn't know at the time, sparked a passion in me for the community. Later in 4th grade, I participated in a cultural awareness project honoring my Native American heritage, and the basket I wove in that project earned a ribbon in the junior art section of the fair. As a high school student, I watched my sister practice tirelessly on her dance routines for her quinceañera, which were held in Herzog Hall. What was a simple empty hall at the fairgrounds was transformed into a vibrant display of culture, bursting with family and friends. Further down the road, I worked my first major role in a large-scale event, the the Lagunitas Beer Circus, held at the Sonoma Marin Fairgrounds. It was at this event I knew event planning and organization was a career I wanted to pursue. I stayed in the industry and climbed the ladder from security to sales, to account management, to helping manage the sales department. I eventually went on to launch the Hen House Festival, the largest gathering of brewery fresh beer. Simultaneously, I continued to pursue my passion for nonprofits and my desire to better the community. While at Lagunitas, I helped participate in the launching of the grants program, and at Hen House, I founded and sat as the director of the donations committee, which also led to the founding of the Justice, Equality, and Inclusion Committee at Hen House Brewing Company. All of this passion and drive was started through my experiences at the Sonoma Marin Fairgrounds, and I am just one member of our community. Much like the Ferris wheel at the carnivals at the fairgrounds, the fairgrounds acts as a focal point for our community. While many people ride the Ferris wheel, each person gains a unique experience and view. This too is true for the fairgrounds. Each member of the community who enters the fairgrounds takes away a different experience. A passion sparked in animal care and agriculture, a passion sparked for craft food and beverage, a passion sparked in art, or for me, a passion sparked in creating experiences. This is why a fairgrounds is important and an integral part of the community. It is a place where community wealth is found in every facet. Wealth of our history and of our cultures, wealth of our local businesses and vendors, wealth of creativity, and a foundation for the future.
And Christy,
Yes.
I'm sorry, can you tell me when you'd like to advance your
Yes, I
slides?
will.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
And this is a good opportunity to take a little pause for the interpreters too, and just ask to give a little pause every few sentences.
Great. Okay, I'll get going again. When you all came to our grounds, I opened with, "Welcome to the Sonoma Marin Fairgrounds, a place of wonder and magic." I meant this quite literally. In the short 6 months that I have had the privilege to work on these grounds, I have watched as the scenery from my office window changes every day. What you may have seen as a simple lawn, I know to be so much more. That lawn is a campgrounds, a canine training grounds, a cultural festival, a beer festival, a music festival, a graduation ceremony, a movie on the lawn, a swap meet, a car show, an art show, ag education display, and for the past several years, a refuge for our community in a time of crisis. Community is an important word. Community is often broken down into 4 key types. Interest, communities of people who share the same interest or passion. Action, communities of people trying to bring about change. Place, communities of people brought together by geographic boundaries. Practice, communities of people in the same profession or undertake the same activities. And in our cases, circumstance, communities of people brought together by external events and situations. I would ask you all, which of these are we talking about, and which of these most importantly defines Petaluma? Recently, the city of Petaluma launched a program discuss the history of the fairgrounds. On their website, I pulled a couple quotes. The city of Petaluma owns the fairgrounds property, which is to say the property exists to serve the best interests of the people of Petaluma. Later, it goes on to say, this property exists to serve the people of Petaluma. In this case, it seems the city of Petaluma sees community defined primarily by place, geographic boundaries. I ask you to look beyond our geographic boundaries. The Sonoma Marin Fairgrounds has acted as an evacuation shelter for the past several years. Okay, now you can go to the next slide. During one fire in the Argus, it was written, "People need help right now. Our community needs us." Are you scared? They were asked. Yes, as they say, you hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Next slide. I encourage you to prepare for the worst. While these may appear to be open grounds, they are vitally needed by the greater community of California and Sonoma County. In another article, during 2020, this is the fourth time that refugees have sought the central Petaluma property, which has become one of the city's most important shelter locations. For many refugees, they plan to come here year over year and have been here for more than 4 years. You can go to the next slide. And the next slide. We are especially equipped to take in not just families, but also livestock. We are unique grounds centrally located near shopping centers, easy access from the freeway, which has made us not only a shelter for families and livestock, but also a hub for first responders. You can go to the next slide. We also are home to the Petaluma Speedway. I pulled a couple quotes. I was invited to the races because I told someone that I'd never been. We went on a chilly Saturday night and I had a blast. The price was $20, not terrible. It was so cold. The first thing we did was get hot cocoa. Then we found some bleacher seats and as it got colder and the night went on. Folks come to the Speedway from all over Sonoma County to enjoy what our city has to offer. This is again part of our larger community. You can go to the next slide. The Speedway has been here for many years, longer than most of us have lived in Petaluma, or for that matter, been alive. And it holds deep traditions for many Petalumans and Sonoma County residents. You can go to the next slide. And next slide. We are also home to the Sonoma Marin Fair, which is coming up this next week, June 22nd to the 26th. You know, next slide. During this fair, we have more than just a carnival. You can go to the next slide. The fair is about bringing the community together from all walks of life, meeting new people, making new friends, and making new connections to the community. Next slide. Folks can enter from all over the Bay Area to baked goods, garden shows, photography, and livestock. Next slide. We also host chef demonstrations and cultural celebration of our community. Next slide. Next slide. We're also home to the annual Diaper Derby, as well as the World's Ugliest Dog Contest, which is going into its 49th year. Next slide. More than just a fair, we are also a fairgrounds that is home to many businesses, one of which is Petaluma Happy Hearts. Happy Hearts has been our tenant for over 5 years. Sorry, lost my place, but some quotes on Happy Hearts. The learning environment at Happy Hearts is a positive, fun, and caring one. You hear lots of laughter, inquisitive questions, and problem solving. What a wonderful place for a child and an incredible teacher, Miss Allison. Back one. Part of what makes our grounds so unique and a wonderful place to have places of education is the children get to see farm animals in their natural habitat, or their farm habitat. So kids can see the cows going for their daily walks down the concourse. We have ag education animals that go to the classrooms. We'll often use the animals to mow down the lawns rather than use lawnmowers. So you can see the cows paid a visit. That's Daisy, made a visit to Happy Hearts. Next slide, please. We're also home to Play Dog Play. I'm running out of time. You can go to the next slide. Playlands, which has paintball, airsoft, laser tag, and Nerf guns. Next slide. And not to forget Elroy's and Java Hut. Sorry, I think I'm on next slide, or is that? Okay. And as I mentioned, we also host Canine Training. We act as a place for the local police to meet up and discuss their shifts. We also host the Petaluma Night Out for first responders, which will be coming up again in August. That's what I got. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Christy. And my apologies for getting the pronunciation of your name wrong again.
No worries.
Hubacher. I'm working on it. Thank you. And next we will go to our last speaker in this section, whose name I also terribly mispronounced, Jeff Schock, the Petaluma Fire Chief. And Jeff, I'll pull up your slides now. The floor is yours.
Great. Good morning, everybody. And don't worry, Alex, I've been called way worse than how you pronounced it. So good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Schock. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today and talk to you a little bit about the fire department in Petaluma. And specifically the question that was brought to me from this group, I believe, was, does the fire department need or want to move, and why? So I'll kind of cover a little bit deeper into all that stuff. I've been with the city for 22 years and the fire chief for the past 6 months. And with the passage of Measure U, it's given the fire department, the police department, all the city to kind of do a reevaluation of soup to nuts on a fresh look at operations, facilities, and how to best spend Measure U money to move forward and increase and improve the city's infrastructure. We're currently doing a strategic analysis through a company called CPSM. If you wouldn't mind going to slide 2 for me, please. And what they're doing is they're looking at our current, in red, there's our current fire stations, and those rings around those fire stations show a 4-minute response time. Now this study, this was done about 4 years ago, or excuse me, about 20 years ago. And as traffic changes, so does our response times. That's our standard. We want to get to 90% of calls within 4 minutes from those strategic locations. CPSM and other analysis have shown that our fire stations are actually well strategically located within the city. So you can see there, we can reach most areas of the city within 4 minutes. One of the problems we're having is that our call volume used to be about 20 years was around the 4,000 calls for service annually. And now we're right up in about the 8,000 calls for service. So what this study is, the preliminary results are finding that where we're having issues is those fire stations are strategically located, but if we're getting 2 or 3 calls within that same area of town, then fire engines are having to respond and ambulances are responding to other parts of the town. It's taken longer, upwards of 6 and 8 minutes. So preliminary results are finding that more potentially beneficial of adding a 4th fire station that would be more centrally located. So if you can kind of see where all those districts come together, having a fire station somewhere in that area would allow that piece of equipment to respond into all areas of the city as a kind of backup for when multiple calls are happening. One of the other things in the study, each of those fire stations has 1 fire engine and 1 ambulance to provide the level of service we do. We do have a ladder truck that's cross-staffed with one of the engines, and it's up at Station 2 on the north end of town there. And one of the things that we do realize, and that this study is preliminary showing us, that we need to have that ladder truck more central, closer to our downtown, and then also closer to the new infill and development that's happening within the city. That ladder truck gives us access to elevated streams of water for larger buildings. It also gives us access to do rescues or access higher floors. And as we know, kind of in the downtown area and south of town, there's a lot of new development. So we do need to get that ladder truck closer to the center of town. And a potential central location would be ideal for that. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide for me, please. This is showing those current fire stations, and it's basically a heat map of our calls for service. With the urban growth boundary, I was talking about those stations strategically located. Usually when cities grow and develop, like you think like in the Sacramento area, they grow outwards, and kind of naturally new schools, new fire stations, new parks become part of, as a city grows outward. In the city of Petaluma, with the urban growth boundary, it's been mostly infill that we're experiencing. So that's the reason, you know, the footprint hasn't changed and those fire stations in the right spots, but unfortunately, you know, the call volume has increased and increased and increased, and there's need for more, not only more response apparatus and equipment and people to help provide that increased demand, but then also the facilities to accommodate that. And that's just kind of showing, you can see where, again, if we had a more centrally located fire headquarters facility, it would be easier to access freeway. It could handle those double up calls. We're looking at evaluating a potential location to move our training facility, which is also on that north end of town. So having a training facility that's more central to where we experience that demand for calls for service would be ideal. We're also looking at, in this map, you can also see the police department. I put a little blue person over there. That's where our police department is located. And some of the preliminary stuff from this study is showing that actually combining public safety facilities is a huge benefit in cost of a facility, also for other collaborations, training rooms. We need to reevaluate an emergency operations center for the city. Currently, the emergency operations for our city is the briefing room at the police station. And that used to work, 10, 20 years ago when our biggest concerns were minor flooding and high winds in the wintertime. It's a whole new world. As Christy mentioned, Petaluma has become a safe haven for the county as far as care and shelter. We have our own threats here within our own community. And our emergency operations center, we've opened our emergency operations center, or EOC, several times since 2017, with the change in climate and fire and other threats that we're having. And then if you wouldn't mind going to the last slide for me. That slide there is showing the increased calls for service that we've had in the Petaluma Fire Department. As I said, we do more than fight fires. We go to car accidents. We transport we have 3 ALS, Advanced Life Support ambulances. We transport roughly 4,000 people to the hospital every year. And as I mentioned, as the population increases and then infill happens, so does the increase in service demand. So with the passage of Measure U, you can see behind me a picture of our current fire station, built in 1938. That's our current fire headquarters. It has not been earthquake retrofitted. It needs Carl from the first presentation to show us how to make that building more energy efficient, meet the current demands of the city, which it will meet the demands of the city as a fire station. And we do need to keep that fire station where it is, but we do need a larger facility to be our fire headquarters facility, training facility, emergency operations center, house a staffed ladder truck that is closer to our downtown area. And center of town is wherever that is, but centrally located would be ideal, is what we're seeing. We have, with this Measure U money, we have the opportunity. I think we have one opportunity to do this right. We need to set ourselves up for the next 50 years. Currently, this fire station behind me is going to be celebrating its 85th year as a fire station. That's not necessarily ideal. And our other fire stations were built in the early 70s and early 80s, other 2 stations. Those will be getting, as part of this evaluation, getting full, hopeful remodels, retrofits, modernization to accommodate a more diverse workforce, more energy efficiency, and increase the capacity based on service demand. So doing a full evaluation of that, we've got the opportunity to do it right. And we're hopeful to be able to build a new public safety facility, headquarters for police and fire, and an emergency operations center here in town. And so to circle back, do we want to move? This current headquarters station near the downtown is in the right location, but there are additional needs, and there is a need for a 4th fire station. So I'm happy to answer any questions as part of the group, and just want to say thank you for the opportunity to present. And yeah, thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you to all of our presenters so much. And panelists, please feel free to raise your virtual hands or your physical hands. All right. And we'll do the same thing as earlier, just anyone who hasn't spoken yet. I will call on first. And Greg, I see your hand, and Eric and Liz, all of whom have spoken today. Okay, let's go to Lena first, because we didn't get to you, Lena, last time, and then we'll circle back in that order I just mentioned. Lena, you have the floor.
Thank you, Alex. I have a question for Chief Shock. Is that how you say your name? And what kind of, in your dream of dreams, what kind of footprint would the facility require?
Great question. I love being a dreamer. I think ideally the city of Petaluma would have a public safety facility that would house not only fire administration, the ladder truck, but then also have the capacity in the future to be able to accommodate an additional ambulance, an additional fire engine, and then also be combined with the police facility and emergency operations center, as well as training. I think something of that nature would probably require, I'm also guesstimating probably 2 or 3 acres of property to do something like that.
All right, let's go next to Eric G.
Hi, thank you. Chief Chalk, I live on the west side of town on the same side as the drawbridge as your current facility is located. I know there are a lot of calls up to the elder care hospitals, and you go by our house a lot. And I'm glad that you're on this side of the drawbridge because of all the proposed development that will be happening on the south side of the bridge. There used to be a motel on the South Boulevard. The property was set aside after the motel was demolished for a fire station. A second lot was purchased behind it, I believe. And I know you're going to need a taller hook and ladder, as the general plan allows taller buildings. I'm assuming that that footprint on the South Boulevard is not going to be big enough. So I'm wondering additional locations, or possibly having a substation with an ambulance closer to those hospitals. What else could work?
Well, great question. Yes, the plan of 20 years ago, and it dissolved in 2006 when redevelopment was taken away by the state, was taken from cities. The plan in the early 2000s was to replace our current fire headquarters facility you see behind me, and replace it with a 3-story building, as you said, at the old Casa Grande motel site at 307 Petaluma Boulevard South. That site would accommodate a lot of what we need. It would accommodate a ladder truck, fire administration by going up and being 3 stories, our fire prevention, an EOC/training room, the ladder truck, an engine, and ambulance, and our on-duty battalion chief, who's a supervisor for the day for all 3 stations. And that was a great plan in the early 2000s. What we're reevaluating is we do have what we're looking at is we do have a current facility, as you see behind me, that could still meet the needs on this side of town with 1 engine and 1 ambulance. It's just too small for a fire headquarters facility and won't accommodate that ladder truck. What we're finding out is, now it's nearly 20 years later, and as call volumes increased, 3 fire stations isn't enough. What's happening is over like the southeast side of town, as you can see from that heat map, is very busy. So the station you see behind me is oftentimes having to respond over to the area of, say, Casa Grande High School. Well, that's quite a distance, and we need to more adequately cover the city, it's not just putting more resources within our existing stations. A centralized location that can respond throughout the city would be more ideal. And as you said, especially for that ladder truck, it's got access to the entire city, would be closer to our, obviously it was behind me or at Boulevard South, it is a little more closer to downtown, but centralized is ideal. When you have one of something, having it in the center is always ideal. And then as far as to your area, yes, that's why it's important to keep the fire station we either have behind me, our current fire station 1, or at the Boulevard South, something on this side of town, and that will reach within a 4-minute response time, all those areas you're talking about. But like you said, when we're going by there all the time, by your house, when that happens twice within a half an hour, we need to call on either that fire engine or ambulance on the far north end of town or the one on the east side of town, southeast, that has to come over. So having that centrally located additional advanced life support, fire resource, and or ambulance more centrally located will just help with overall coverage. So the Petaluma Boulevard South, the Petaluma Boulevard South site is not off the table. We're doing a full evaluation. It's just looking like something more central would be more ideal, because we are, and the reuse of the existing facility behind me may be more beneficial and cost effective.
Okay. Thank you. And a reminder, feel free to direct your questions towards any of the 3 speakers on this panel. Next, we'll go to Eric, or sorry, next we'll go to Liz.
Hi, I also have a question for Fire Chief Chuck. So what I'm wondering, and forgive my ignorance if it's just not knowing, is are there the plan, this ideal place that you would have in the fairgrounds, are there currently funds already allocated for this, or how would this be funded? And again, I'm apologizing if this is just lack of knowledge on my end. If the lease is renewed with the 4th DAA, is a new improved fire station completely off the table, not feasible?
I don't know the answer to the second part of your question, and I'm here as an invitee. I'm looking at a centrally located facility now. Whether that's, I mean, there's not a lot of options in our city, unfortunately. So I'm not here to necessarily advocate or about Fairgrounds, although that is a centrally located city-owned piece of property. I can't answer the second part of your question, but financially, we are planning with the Measure U funds. We are able to bond against the anticipated revenue from that increased sales tax. So we already have a plan in place, I believe in 2024, to do a bond, and it doesn't need to be a voter approved bond. It's basically borrowing the money against anticipated future revenue from that sales tax. So there is a plan for, I believe, a $21 million bond in 2 years to replace, the initial goal is to replace the facility you see behind me. But what we're really doing it right. We need to do a full evaluation to really, truly determine what are our needs and what's the best way to do that. Like I said, 20 years ago, it was pretty clear that the Boulevard South was a great idea, but unfortunately 20 years have gone by without being able to make that happen. And now we're reevaluating our needs. So yes, through bonding, we hope to be able to finance whatever project we come up with as best practice.
Okay. And next in the stack, we had Greg with a physical hand raised.
Okay, can I ask a question to each of the panel? One question. Can I ask?
Oh, you can ask one. Yeah, you can ask one question and invite any of them to respond.
Oh, okay.
But if you have a separate question for each, please just choose one. Please just choose one now.
Yeah. I'd like to
can you choose one, and then we'll come back to the others if we have time.
Can I talk to Chief, the fire chief? Hello, Mr. Scheck. First of all, thank you for all the services you've done. Hats off to all you guys. You know, you you've saved lives, and it's very, very important work. And what I'd like to bring out is that is there a study been done regarding the causes of fire, why it is increased? Can we address that problem with changing the materials that the buildings are made, you know, or the you know, a lot of the fires are caused by PG&E having antiquated electrical wires that are going from tree to tree. And then my second point was instead of having a new hub, would it be more a better idea to have several smaller hubs, substations? Because speed is at an essence. When the fire starts, you have to be there within minutes. And maybe having a centralized location, it might take you longer to get there. I mean, that's my suggestion anyway, that you have a smaller hub, and then maybe you employ what France is doing. They only send when they send out an ambulance, they don't send out a fire truck. They have almost like a nurse, a qualified nurse, to fix whoever is in need, and if he needs to be taken to hospital, and then they transport him to hospital. But a lot of times, a lot of people call emergency services, and they're not really emergencies. You know, that's two of my points anyway. Thank you.
All right, I'll answer. I think there's at least 3 in there, but thanks for the questions, Greg, and comments, and I'll try to address those as well as I can. First off, when we're talking about a centralized hub, that's in addition to the 3 current stations we have. So our current 3 stations are better spread throughout the city, and what we're looking at is a 4th basically to move our ladder truck closer to the downtown, and then it'll also be backup for those other areas. So it's not just the hub of a wheel. We already have the spokes going out to the outlier stations. So it would be a 4th station versus replacing anything. So it changed from the 3 current to a 4th. We send a fire engine to medical emergencies as well, because our ambulances, we turn people's living rooms into mini emergency departments. When there's a critical need and a patient has a serious need, it takes more than 1 or 2 people to help. Oftentimes people are on the 2nd floor of a building. Oftentimes we're having to carry people who may be heavy, too heavy for 2 people to move safely to the ambulance. So the fire engines go to calls. So we have at least a 5-person team to help care for that person, and then also to move that person. And the reason we bring a fire engine is so that while we're there, if there's a fire, or on our way back from there, if there's a fire or another emergency, we have our toolbox and what we need to help mitigate other emergencies. As far as fire threat, yes, PG&E has been responsible for a lot of wildfires in our surrounding areas. But we don't just respond to wildfires. We have fires all the time in Petaluma from smoking, inappropriate discarded smoking material, from electrical stuff within houses. And you're right, getting there fast is important. We have an ordinance in the city. Any new construction has fire sprinklers. We have a very robust fire prevention bureau that because fire prevention is the key to any emergency. Prevention is the key, but when that doesn't always happen, we need to be there right away. We just had a call the other day where a fence caught on fire between 2 homes, and because we were there within 3 minutes, we prevented that fence fire from spreading to 2 houses. So time is of the essence, and so more important to have the centrally located ladder truck closer to the downtown area and as an additional resource that can back up any other districts that are experiencing increased call volume. Hopefully that answered most.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I see Grace's hand raised, and Grace, you haven't asked a question yet today, so I think let's go to you, and then probably, well, Grace first. Go ahead, take yourself off mute. Oh, Grace, just one moment. Can you get someone to help Grace unmute? Okay, go ahead, Grace.
Hello, Mr. Jeff. I just want to thank you because you are the chief of all the fire stations. I live close by on McDowell and Cowfield, and the fire station is very close. And I thank all of you because of the help and everything throughout the whole city. But I just want to ask you a big favor. Apparently, these stations, I mean, these trucks or whatever, the ambulances, I guess, they have a very heavy noise. And then I am at the corner and they are going back and forth because there is a light there. And then they have to notify the transportation that they are coming. But the noise and some of the trucks, they are very heavy. I don't know what is going on with these noises. And sometimes it's late at night and something like that. I don't know if it could be change the sound or something, so it will be not too strong, I guess. I don't know, because during the day, I guess it's okay, but not at night. At night when everybody's sleeping or something, and there's no transportation too much, so they're supposed to be lower, I guess. I don't know, in order to pass by or something. So I will really appreciate if you do something about the noise of these trucks, whatever it is, that ambulances, I guess they are, I don't know, but the noises are very strong, and I really appreciate all the work that you do throughout the city. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a tough one. I'm sorry, that's bothersome. I know it is. It's important for this, getting a call fast is very important. And we do have to, vehicle accidents, fire engines and ambulances getting in vehicle accidents, that's the worst thing to happen. And we really try our hardest to make sure that we're driving safe. And when we're asking for the right to go through an intersection and not make a full and complete stop, we need to make sure that people are aware that we're doing that. And we try to do it as safe as we can. And being loud, unfortunately, is part of that. People's windows, cars now, when the windows are rolled up and the radio's on, it's really hard to hear in a car. We do try at nighttime when there's less traffic. We try more often to have just the lights on and only sound the siren if there's another vehicle within the area. If it's late at night and there's no traffic, we'll just usually respond with just the lights. And I'll have to think about a better way to answer that question, or for any other mitigations. Sorry, I don't have a great answer for you on that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, and just a reminder to all panelists that part of the group agreements that we've discussed in this process is focusing on kind of the fairgrounds, the task at hand. So you're here to look at the future of the fairgrounds property. And so just let's use the resource and wisdom of your presenters for that topic. All right, let's keep going down the list here. I see Brian, you have a hand, but you did ask one question this morning. Tina, would you remind me if you asked a question earlier as well?
Yes.
You did. Okay, so let's go to Brian and then down the list.
Thank you. This would be for Christy. I was looking at a document that I found presented by, it's an older document, but I'm going to call it the Populous Market Consultant document. And in it, there were 4 possibilities that were presented by this consulting group. And in these 4 possibilities for a future layout and future development of the fairgrounds, there wasn't a single one of the 4 options, A through D, that included the Speedway, which leads me then to my actual question, which is, if there was a recommendation that was made for a term of a lease that was to be 33 or 50 years, and part of that would include the Speedway itself the lease there being discontinued and that particular property section zoned CF given back over to the management of Petaluma City proper for the development of a park or an emergency use center, a larger emergency facility. That would be my question.
Yeah, hold on just a second. It's funny you bring that up. I have those. So those were presented by the Fair Board. So those are our suggestions. We were trying really hard to work with the city, talk to the city. The city expressed they wanted open parks. So we tried to create plans in which we did cut down our current acreage significantly. I'm not sure the city ever considered those, but I can grab those real fast so everyone can see what we're talking about. Give me just a second to run over to it. Okay, so it's gonna be a little hard to see. I don't have them scanned in yet. They're still in their frames. Oh, hold on. I have to turn off the blurred background. There you go. So this is one. And I can, if you request, again, if you put any questions or requests through Alex or Lynn, Healthy Democracy folks, we can get these to you. This is another option we presented. Another option we presented. So we did present several options. You're correct. Some of those options did involve losing the grandstands. So the grandstands is more than just the Speedway. While the Speedway is our permanent tenant there, or annual tenant there, there is more that goes on there. Again, I encourage you all to come to the fair. It's hard to explain something if you don't see it. So during the fair, we do have shows in the grandstands outside of the race. Although we do have a race on Sunday as well. Honestly, what we need as a fairgrounds, again, we're not just a fair, we're the 4th DAA, we're District Agricultural Association. We need to be able to provide ag education. We need to be able to provide a place for agriculture in times of emergencies. We do rely on having permanent tenants for our income. So we need the space to function and, be profitable. We do get some funding from the state, but a large portion of our funding does come from the fair, permanent tenants, interim rentals. It all works in together. So it's a long way to answer your question. We'll accept a lease that involves us being able to still support the community. And what that looks like, I don't know. I think that's part of why you all are here. And I think it involves longer conversation with the city, with us. I encourage all you to come. I encourage the city to come to our fairgrounds more often. We host over 100 events, including most of which are nonprofit events. And if you haven't been here to see it, it's hard to explain how important this is to the community. So if a renewed lease involves losing a portion of our lands, Jeff was explaining, he needs 2 to 3 acres. One of our permanent tenants is rebuilt together. They're in what used to be a firehouse. So it makes sense. It does make sense to have a fire station here, emergency fire station here. And we're open to that. We just want the conversation to continue. And we want an option that doesn't involve these lands disappearing altogether. Because once you build on something, there's no undoing that. And we do need some open space and room for agriculture and for events. So I hope we find a middle ground similar to the Marin Fairgrounds. That's important too. What we do as sorry, I guess I'm answering someone's questions in the chat. I probably shouldn't do that, huh? I should wait for their turn, but
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, not everyone can see the chat.
Yes, we are open to negotiating a different lease. You all don't have to recommend, let's renew the lease exactly as it is. This lease is very old. Some of it was handshakes. It may very well be time for a different lease, a fresh lease that actually takes into account what our community and like I said, our greater community, not just Petaluma, needs today.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you to this round of presenters. We're gonna leave it here for today, for this session, so that we have a little bit of time to debrief in small groups. You've just heard a ton of information, and we wanna make sure you get a little bit of time in small groups to process what you just heard before we break for lunch. So folks who have your hands up, please write your questions down, bring them back later. And thank you, presenters. We can give a little round of applause, emojis, whatever you prefer. Thank you for being with us and taking the time today. I've also thanked Carl. He just had to step out for another engagement. All right, so Grace, are you ready to open breakout rooms?
I'm ready.
Fantastic. Let's do that. We'll have 10 minutes for discussion and then come back and break for lunch until 1:30 afterwards.
Okay, so I am opening rooms and I will close the live stream.